The council chambers fell silent as Admiral Ziv Koral's proposal hung in the air. 17 representatives from the most powerful species in the hegemony exchanged troubled glances, their various appendages and sensory organs conveying the universal emotion. Fear. "You cannot be serious," Elder Thexelah finally said, rising from her hovering platform. Her 7 eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of extreme agitation among the Viridian species. Humans are quarantined for good reason. Their psychological profiles indicate excessive aggression, dangerous curiosity, and a disturbing affinity for conflict. Admiral Ziv Koral remained steady, his silver scales maintaining their formal pattern despite the tension. "I have reviewed the first contact records from 150 years ago. The human response was not unprovoked. Our observers approached their military installations unannounced. They fired upon diplomatic vessels," countered Representative Moskal, his gelatinous form rippling with indignation. "They fired warning shots," the admiral corrected, after 3 attempts at communication were ignored. "Then they immediately attempted to establish peaceful contact once our ships withdrew to a respectful distance." The holographic display in the center of the chamber shifted, showing statistical projections of the void swarm's advance. Red markers indicated consumed systems, over 800 in the past decade alone. Yellow markers showed current combat zones, fewer than 30 remained. Green markers for secure hegemony systems had dwindled to a pitiful 100. The Orion defensive line was our final fallback position. Ziv Koral continued. 300 years of war, and we have done nothing but delay the inevitable. We lose because we fight according to patterns, doctrines, and protocols established millennia ago. The swarm adapts faster than we can respond. On Earth, Commander Eliza Santos stood on the observation deck of the newly completed United Space Forces headquarters in Colorado. Through the massive windows, she watched the latest generation of orbital defense platforms being loaded onto transport shuttles. Humanity had spent the last century preparing for a threat they couldn't identify, driven by the mysterious visitation that government records still classified as the encounter. "Impressive, isn't it?" said Director Chen, joining her at the window. 50 new platforms, each carrying enough firepower to level a small continent. Santos nodded. "And still we have no idea what we're preparing for." The encounter made one thing clear: we're not alone, and not everyone out there is friendly, Chen replied. "Better prepared than caught unprepared." In the hegemony chambers, the debate had turned technical. "Even if we considered your proposal," said Science Minister Valsheen, her crystalline form refracting light as she moved, "lifting the quarantine would require council unanimity. Protocol 7319 cannot be reversed without." "Protocol 7319 can be temporarily suspended under Article 17, interrupted the Admiral, "which provides emergency measures during existential threats. I believe the complete annihilation of all intelligent life in the galaxy qualifies." He gestured to his aide, who distributed data crystals to each council member. "These contain my formal request for suspension, including tactical analyses, strategic projections, and my personal authorization, codes accepting responsibility for the consequences." Elder Thexelah inserted the crystal into her neural interface. Her expression shifted from dismissal to concern as she processed the information. "These projection models, they show total hegemony collapse within 14 stellar cycles." 12, corrected the Admiral. "The models were updated this morning after we lost the Rigel system." Back on Earth, Santos received urgent orders redirecting her from the promotion ceremony to a classified briefing. Her second-in-command, Major Jackson, looked perplexed as he delivered the message. "They're calling in everyone with first contact simulation experience," he said. "Something big is happening." In orbit above Earth, automated defense systems detected an anomaly at the edge of the solar system, a distortion in space-time that their programming couldn't identify. Deep space sensors recorded energy signatures unlike anything in their databases. In the Hegemony Council chambers, the vote was taken. A holographic tally appeared above the central display. 14 in favor, 3 opposed. The protocol is suspended, announced Elder Thexula reluctantly. Admiral Ziv Koral, you are authorized to make contact with Earth and petition for their military assistance. May the progenitors forgive us for what we are about to unleash upon the galaxy. The Admiral's scales shifted briefly to a pattern of satisfaction before returning to formal neutrality. The diplomatic vessel Celestial Harmony will depart immediately. I recommend we begin preparing our fleet commanders for significant cultural adjustment. As the council session ended, Ziv Koral received an urgent communication from the border monitoring station. Admiral, swarm vessels have changed course. Multiple hive clusters are now moving directly toward Earth's sector at maximum speed. How could they know? Whispered the Admiral. We've only just made our decision. The analyst's voice trembled. Unknown, sir, but their behavior suggests they consider humans a greater threat than our combined fleets. Ziv Koral stared at the tactical display, watching the red markers converge toward humanity's isolated world. Perhaps they're right to be afraid, he murmured. For all our sakes, I hope they are. The interior of the Celestial Harmony defied human architectural understanding. Corridors curved in mathematically perfect arcs that somehow connected spaces that shouldn't logically adjoin. Materials shimmered with colors beyond Earth's visible spectrum, appearing to shift depending on the observer's emotional state. Commander Santos fought to maintain her composure as Ambassador Nemvora led the human delegation deeper into the vessel. Your species values directness in communication, the ambassador noted, her translator converting her melodic tones into precise English. This is why Admiral Ziv Koral requested I show you our tactical situation without diplomatic filters. They entered a spherical chamber where stars and galaxies floated in three-dimensional projection. Santos recognized the Milky Way, then watched as the display zoomed to show their region of the galaxy. Red markers pulsed across hundreds of star systems. Each red indicator represents a system consumed by the void swarm, Nemvora explained. The process is always the same. They arrive, convert all organic matter to their own biomass, harvest resources, and move to the next target. Dr. Keller, the xenobiologist on Santos' team, studied the progression pattern. They're systematic, methodical, almost like they're farming the galaxy, Santos finished, recognizing the pattern from Earth's agricultural history. They're harvesting in sections, leaving some areas to regrow before returning. Nemvora's bioluminescent patterns flickered in surprise. In 3 centuries of war, none of our analysts made that observation. Santos shrugged. Earth's history is filled with conquest patterns. We recognize them because we've enacted them ourselves. She gestured to the display. Show me the hegemony's standard response tactics. The hologram shifted to display a battle sequence. Hegemony vessels arranged in perfect geometric formations executed precisely coordinated attack patterns. Their energy weapons fired in synchronized bursts, creating beautiful, symmetrical destruction patterns across swarm bioships. Initially successful, the attacks quickly lost effectiveness as the swarm vessels developed reflective carapaces that redirected energy weapons back toward hegemony ships. The hegemony commanders responded by adjusting firing frequencies in predictable increments, which the swarm adapted to with equal predictability. Major Takashi, the weapons specialist on Santos' team, watched with growing frustration. They're fighting like it's a simulation. Where's the unpredictability? The strategic deception. The hegemony military doctrine emphasizes perfect coordination, Nemvora explained. The progenitors taught that maximum efficiency comes from unified action. The progenitors were wrong, Santos said bluntly. At least about warfare against an adaptive enemy. The human delegation retired to their assigned quarters to discuss privately. The rooms, while luxurious by human standards, contained subtle monitoring devices that Santos' security officer, Lieutenant Parker, quickly identified and disabled. They're watching us, Parker noted. Of course they are, Santos replied. We're the wild cards they're desperate enough to play, but not comfortable enough to trust. Dr. Keller pulled up data on his tablet. Their technology is centuries beyond ours, but their tactical thinking seems limited, almost like they've never had to innovate. Because they haven't, Santos realized. The ambassador mentioned this hegemony has existed for thousands of years. They've only faced this swarm for 3 centuries. Before that, they were the dominant power with no real threats. Major Takashi concluded. They forgot how to fight real battles because they never needed to. Santos paced the room, mind racing. Earth has never known that luxury. Our entire history is constant conflict, adaptation, and counter-adaptation. So what's our approach? Asked Lieutenant Parker. We can't match their technology. We don't need to, Santos replied. We need to teach them how to fight dirty. The following morning, Admiral Ziv Koral joined their delegation for the first official strategic planning session. His silver scales shifted subtly as he studied the humans, a sign of intense curiosity that his rigid military training couldn't completely suppress. Commander Santos, the Council has authorized full technological exchange to upgrade your vessels, he announced. Our engineers can begin reinforcing your hulls with our alloys immediately and installing shield generators. Grateful for the upgrades, Santos replied, but we have conditions of our own. The Admiral's scales flickered with surprise. Conditions. We maintain command of our own vessels. We select our own targets and tactics within the broader strategic framework. And most importantly, we keep our own weapons alongside your upgrades. Your weapons are, the Admiral hesitated, searching for a diplomatic term. Primitive, inefficient, crude, Santos offered. Perhaps, but the swarm has adapted to your energy weapons. They haven't adapted to kinetic projectiles, nuclear payloads, or electromagnetic pulse generators. Because such weapons are obsolete, the Admiral countered. Santos smiled. That's exactly why they'll work. The best strategy against an adaptive enemy is to use what they've never needed to adapt to. A silent moment passed as the Admiral processed her logic. Finally, his scales shifted to a pattern that the humans would later learn indicated grudging acknowledgement. Very well, Commander. Show us these obsolete weapons of yours. The Nevada desert hummed with activity as sunrise painted the mountains gold. Hegemony shuttles, their crystalline hulls refracting the morning light into prismatic patterns, landed in precise formations beside human military transports. Commander Santos watched from the command center as the first joint human hegemony construction teams began their work. The energy output from their smallest power cell could run Las Vegas for a year, Major Takashi commented, reviewing the technical specifications the hegemony had shared. And they consider it an emergency backup unit. Focus on integration points, Santos reminded him. I want to know exactly how their technology connects with ours. Outside, hegemony engineers with their multi-limbed precision worked alongside human technicians on the U.S. Defiant, a repurposed aircraft carrier that would serve as humanity's first interstellar warship. The scene repeated across the basin where 11 other vessels underwent similar transformations. Kiravash, the hegemony weapons officer with a chitinous exoskeleton that resembled polished obsidian, approached Santos with visible agitation. His translator struggled to convey the complex emotional harmonics in his native speech. Commander, I must formally object to the modification plans for your vessel's offensive systems, he said, mandibles clicking rapidly. The mass drivers you insist on mounting consume power that could be diverted to shield generators or hyperdrive systems. Santos studied the holographic display showing the Defiance schematics. The railguns stay, she stated firmly, as do the missile arrays and the electromagnetic pulse generators. These weapons are, Kiravash began. Inefficient by your standards, Santos interrupted. I understand. But the swarm has never encountered them in combat. Because they are obsolete. Kiravash's translator couldn't fully mask his frustration. We abandoned such primitive delivery systems when our civilization was barely capable of interplanetary travel. Santos gestured to a nearby technician, who brought over what looked like a simple metal rod about 30 centimeters long. This is a tungsten penetrator round for our main railgun. No explosive payload, no energy signature, just 18 kilograms of dense metal. She handed it to Kurvash, who nearly dropped it, unprepared for its weight. When accelerated to 15% of light speed, Santos continued, "This primitive projectile delivers more kinetic energy than your most advanced energy lance, and it can't be deflected by energy shields calibrated for photonic weapons." Kurvash's compound eyes studied the metal rod with new interest. The swarm's adaptive carapaces are optimized against energy attacks. Exactly, Santos nodded. Sometimes the old ways work best precisely because they're old. 10 days later, the retrofitted fleet was ready. 12 human vessels, now equipped with hegemony technology, but maintaining their distinctive human weapon systems, prepared for their first engagement. The Proxima Centauri system, being closest to Earth, had already detected swarm scout ships at its outer boundary. Admiral Ziv Koral transmitted the hegemony battle doctrine to all vessels, a complex geometric formation designed to maximize overlapping fields of fire while minimizing exposure to enemy attacks. Santos studied it briefly before sending her own tactical plan to the human captains. "With respect, Admiral," she communicated, "we'll be implementing alternate attack patterns." From the bridge of the Defiant, Santos watched as the fleet transitioned to hyperspace, a sensation her human physiology experienced as momentary nausea, followed by a strange stillness. When they emerged at Proxima Centauri, the swarm scouts were already engaging the system's meager defenses. "Hegemony vessels, execute Formation Primus," ordered Admiral Ziv Koral from his command ship. The hegemony vessels moved with mathematical precision, arranging themselves in a three-dimensional lattice pattern. Their energy weapons fired in synchronized bursts, initially tearing through several smaller swarm vessels. "Human vessels, implement Chaos Protocol," Santos countered. "All captains have execution discretion." The 12 human ships broke in different directions, each following unpredictable vectors. The UNS Defiant accelerated directly toward the largest swarm vessel, a maneuver so seemingly suicidal that even the swarm appeared confused by it. "Targeting solutions locked," reported the weapons officer. "Main railgun charge." Santos watched as the hegemony's perfect formation began to falter. The swarm had already adapted to their energy weapons, developing reflective carapaces that absorbed or redirected the attacks. 3 hegemony vessels reported critical damage as their own weapon energy was turned against them. "Fire main railgun," Santos ordered. The Defiant shuddered as the massive electromagnetic launcher activated. The tungsten penetrator exited the barrel at a significant fraction of light speed, leaving a visible distortion in space as it traveled. It struck the swarm vessel's central mass, passing through its adaptive defenses like they didn't exist, and continuing through the biological vessel entirely. "Direct hit," the tactical officer reported unnecessarily. Everyone on the bridge could see the swarm ship breaking apart, its biological components unable to maintain structural integrity after the catastrophic damage. Over the communications channel, Admiral Ziv Koral's voice carried a tone the translator identified as stunned disbelief. "Commander Santos, what exactly did you just do?" The aftermath of the Proxima Centauri engagement transformed the dynamics of the Joint Command. Video records of the battle spread throughout the hegemony fleet, human vessels performing maneuvers that hegemony tactical computers classified as irrational and self-endangering, yet undeniably effective. The Defiance railgun strike became the most studied footage, with hegemony weapons specialists reviewing it frame by frame. Within the vast circular chamber of the hegemony Central Command, Santos led her first tactical briefing for a mixed audience of human and alien officers. The walls displayed three-dimensional battle projections that shifted and flowed according to her gestures. "The swarm adapts through direct experience," she explained, highlighting the biological neural pathways of a captured swarm drone. They cannot defend against what they've never encountered. This gives us a temporary advantage with our kinetic weapons, but it won't last forever. Fleet Commander Toleran, his neck frills extended in a posture the humans had learned indicated skepticism, raised a three-fingered hand. You suggest our advantage is merely temporary. Then what purpose lies in pursuing these unorthodox methods? Santos nodded at the question. The advantage of any specific weapon is temporary against an adaptive enemy, but the advantage of unpredictability is permanent, so long as we continue to evolve our tactics. She gestured to the tactical display, which shifted to show the next planned engagement. This brings me to Operation Broken Mirror. The display showed a swarm hive cluster currently harvesting resources from the Ta-CD system. Santos outlined a plan that immediately provoked murmurs among the hegemony officers. A three-pronged attack with each group using entirely different weapon systems and tactical approaches. Most controversially, one group would initially appear to retreat, drawing swarm forces into a prepared ambush. You propose intentional deception, Toleran stated, his translator unable to fully mask his discomfort, using the appearance of defeat to create tactical advantage. Correct, Santos confirmed. The swarm expects you to fight according to established doctrines. They've never seen military deception from the hegemony. Admiral Ziv Korel, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Commander Santos' approach has merit. The battle at Proxima Centauri resulted in the lowest casualty rate we've experienced in 50 years of engagements. As the briefing concluded, the various alien officers departed in clusters, their conversations a mixture of reluctant curiosity and ingrained resistance to change. Santos noticed one hegemony officer remaining behind, a quiet observer from the science division who had not spoken during the meeting. You have questions, Dr. Vendara? Santos asked. The hegemony scientist's translucent appendages rippled in what humans had learned was an expression of intellectual excitement. Not questions, Commander. An observation. Your species approaches warfare as we approach scientific inquiry, with hypothesis, experimentation, and iterative improvement. We call it adaptation, Santos replied. It's how humans have survived our entire history. This concept fascinates me, Vendara admitted. Would you be willing to coordinate with our research division? There's a scientist named Raman working on biological countermeasures who might benefit from your perspective. The research laboratories occupied an entire section of the hegemony flagship. Unlike the geometric precision of the command centers, the labs bustled with a controlled chaos that felt almost familiar to Santos. Dr. Amir Rahman had converted his workstation into something resembling an Earth laboratory, with traditional microscopes alongside hegemony quantum scanners. Commander, Rahman greeted her, looking up from a Petri dish. Perfect timing. I've been analyzing swarm tissue samples with methods the hegemony researchers considered too basic to attempt. He guided her to his microscope. Look at this reaction pattern when the sample is exposed to a simple radioactive isotope. The cellular structure destabilizes completely. Santos observed the rapidly deteriorating swarm cells. They're susceptible to radiation. Not just any radiation, Rahman clarified. This specific frequency disrupts their quantum communication network. Each swarm entity is part of a hive mind linked through quantum entanglement. This radiation collapses the entanglement without damaging conventional matter. The hegemony scientist, Vendara, vibrated her sensing filaments with clear confusion. We documented this reaction pattern decades ago, but classified it as a minor curiosity. The radiation is produced by decay processes found in common elements throughout the galaxy, too ubiquitous to be valuable as a specialized weapon. Rahman smiled. That's exactly what makes it perfect. The swarm evolved in deep space, avoiding systems with this radiation signature. They never needed to develop resistance to something so common. Santos looked between the two scientists, her mind already formulating applications. How quickly can we modify our nuclear warheads to enhance this specific radiation frequency? Rahman's expression shifted to one of cautious optimism. Days, not weeks. We maintain a stockpile of the necessary isotopes as standard radiation shielding components. Begin immediately, Santos ordered. And Dr. Vandera, we'll need your expertise to determine the most effective delivery methods against their central control nodes. For the first time, Santos saw the alien scientist's appendages form a pattern that her translator interpreted as profound respect. The hegemony has fought this war for 3 centuries, Vandera said quietly. Yet, in mere weeks, your species identifies vulnerabilities we overlooked because they were too obvious. Santos nodded. Sometimes the most powerful solutions are hiding in plain sight. The merchant vessel Wandering Star docked at the crowded trading outpost of Carroll Station. Its captain, a 4-armed Zentari named Vosselin, carried news more valuable than any cargo in his holds. In the station's central gathering hall, dozens of species mingled in the neutral territory that remained one of the few unaffected by the war. I witnessed it myself, Vosselin insisted to the skeptical crowd gathered around his table. A human vessel, half the size of a hegemony cruiser, charging directly at a swarm-high ship. We all thought it was a suicide run. And prompted a serpentine Nithvar trader. It fired some kind of solid projectile. The captain continued, gesturing with his lower arms, while his upper ones maintained a dignified posture. No energy signature, no plasma trail. Just metal, moving incredibly fast. Tore through the swarm ship like it was nothing. The humans call it a railgun. Similar conversations echoed across 1,000 worlds at the galaxy's edges. Species that had lost hope in the hegemony's ability to contain the swarm now whispered of the strange newcomers who fought with unpredictable tactics and inexplicable success. In the secure communications center of the hegemony flagship, Santos reviewed the latest intelligence reports with growing concern. Swarm fleet movements had shifted dramatically in the weeks following humanity's entry into the war. They're redirecting, she noted, highlighting the new trajectories on the holographic display. 3 major hive clusters have abandoned resource-rich systems to converge toward Earth's sector. Admiral Ziv Koral's scales shifted to a pattern indicating deep concern. This is unprecedented. The swarm has always prioritized systems with maximum biological and mineral resources. They recognize the threat we pose, Santos explained, studying the movement patterns. We're the first species they've encountered in this galaxy that fights unpredictably. They're adapting their strategic priorities. The implications settled heavily over the command staff. The swarm, previously content to methodically harvest the galaxy system by system, now considered humanity a priority target to be eliminated before continuing their consumption. We've gotten their attention, Major Takashi observed grimly. Now we need to make them regret it. Meanwhile, across occupied territories already claimed by the swarm, something unprecedented began to occur. On worlds where resistance had been crushed years earlier, subjugated populations began sabotage operations against swarm processing centers. On Alteris Prime, former miners used improvised explosives to destroy nutrient distribution nodes. In the Rigel system, aquatic Morkai damaged critical underwater breeding chambers. These resistance cells communicated using frequencies and methods the swarm hadn't bothered to monitor. Primitive radio transmissions, light signal codes, even physical message drops. The hegemony's rigid communication protocols had been easily intercepted and neutralized years ago, but these improvised methods proved surprisingly effective. A secure transmission reached the hegemony flagship from one such resistance cell. The leader, a gaunt Altarian whose exoskeleton showed signs of severe malnutrition, addressed the command staff directly. "We heard humans have joined the fight," the resistance leader stated simply. "We heard they fight differently, using unconventional tactics the swarm cannot predict. We request information on these methods." Santos exchanged glances with Admiral Ziv Koral, whose scales now displayed a pattern humans had learned to recognize as cautious hope. "This changes everything," the Admiral said quietly. Resistance movements on occupied worlds have never been coordinated before. Because they were following hegemony doctrine for resistance operations, Santos pointed out. Predictable protocols the swarm easily countered. A bold plan took shape, Operation Wildfire. Using secure channels monitored by Dr. Raman and his team, Santos began transmitting simplified tactical guides to resistance cells throughout occupied territories. The information focused on guerrilla tactics, asymmetric warfare, and improvised weapons designed to disrupt swarm processing centers with minimal resources. The Hegemony Council, initially hesitant to approve such an uncontrolled approach, could not argue with the results. Within weeks, swarm efficiency in occupied systems dropped measurably as they diverted resources to counter the suddenly effective resistance movements. At a strategy session in the flagship's command center, Santos presented the next phase of the operation to a now receptive audience of hegemony commanders. The swarm is adapting to our kinetic weapons, she acknowledged. They've already developed denser carapaces on their newer vessels. But Dr. Raman's radiation discovery gives us a new advantage. The holographic display shifted to show a modified missile system. These delivery platforms can penetrate swarm defenses and release the radiation directly into their control nodes, disrupting their quantum communication network. Admiral Ziv Koral studied the designs with newfound respect. Where do you propose we deploy these weapons first, Commander? Santos highlighted a system near the galaxy's core, a location that caused murmurs among the assembled officers. The Vega system. We strike directly at one of their primary command nodes. That's deep in swarm-controlled space, objected Fleet Commander Toleran. Our doctrine explicitly forbids deep penetration attacks without established supply lines. Exactly why they won't expect it, Santos replied with a thin smile. The swarm knows your doctrines better than you do. It's time to rewrite them. The Vega mission briefing concluded with a somber assessment of survival probabilities. Even with the combined force of human tactics and hegemony technology, the strike team faced daunting odds. Santos surveyed the volunteers, a mix of human special forces operators and hegemony commandos who had embraced the unpredictable combat style of their human counterparts. Once we reach the surface, standard communication protocols will fail, she explained, activating a holographic display of the target area. The swarm maintains a quantum interference field around primary hive structures. We'll rely on visual signals and emergency short-range transmitters only. Lieutenant Kara Chen, the team's demolition specialist, studied the structural analysis of the hive node. These support columns appear biological rather than constructed. Will they respond to damage by regenerating? Yes, but not quickly, answered Zelthran, a hegemony commando whose exoskeleton had been modified with adaptive camouflage. The primary node structure prioritizes computational functions over structural repair. We'll have approximately 14 minutes after initial damage before significant regeneration occurs. The insertion vessel, disguised with salvaged components from destroyed swarm scouts, approached Vega Prime under cover of the main battle. Outside, the largest fleet engagement in recorded history created a chaotic backdrop of destruction that concealed their approach. Human vessels led formations that constantly shifted and reformed, preventing the swarm from predicting attack vectors. Santos felt the shudder as their ship entered Vega's atmosphere. Through the viewport, she glimpsed the surface of a once thriving world now transformed into something nightmarish. Vast processing structures stretched across the landscape, pulsating with sickly bioluminescence. Rivers ran thick with nutrient solutions feeding the growing swarm biomass. The native ecology had been completely consumed, replaced by an alien biology optimized for resource extraction. Prepare for drop, the pilot announced. Approach vector calculated to appear as debris from orbital battle. The team secured their equipment, a mixture of hegemony energy weapons and human conventional arms, alongside the specialized radiation devices developed by Dr. Raman. Each device contained isotopes specifically tuned to disrupt the swarm's quantum communication frequency. The landing was controlled but jarring. The ship skimmed low over a ridge of partially processed mineral deposits before settling into a narrow ravine that shielded them from immediate detection. Within minutes, the strike team deployed, moving with practiced efficiency despite the wildly different physiologies of its members. First objective: reach the central processing node without alerting defensive measures, Santos reminded them through her helmet's communication system. They moved through the transformed landscape, witnessing the horror of the swarm's consumption firsthand. Skeletal remnants of magnificent structures rose from the processed terrain, all that remained of a civilization that had flourished for millennia before the swarm arrived. Zelthran paused at what appeared to be a memorial plaza, now half subsumed by swarm growth. His translator conveyed a tone of profound grief. My ancestors traded with the vegan people. Their architecture was renowned throughout the sector. We'll make this count, Santos assured him, placing a hand briefly on his armored shoulder, a human gesture of solidarity the hegemony commandos had come to understand. As they approached the central hive structure, the team encountered their first swarm drones, mindless workers maintaining external nutrient channels. Lieutenant Chen deployed a sonic disruptor that affected the drone's equilibrium sensors without alerting the hive network. The team eliminated the confused drones with silent precision. Different physiology from the combat variants we encountered in space, noted the team's xenobiologist. These are specialized for ground maintenance, limited sensory capacity. The central node structure loomed before them, a massive, pulsating organic tower reaching hundreds of meters into the sky. Unlike the utilitarian processing structures surrounding it, this building retained elements of the original vegan architecture, repurposed and incorporated into the swarm's biological systems. They preserve certain elements of conquered cultures, Zelthran observed. We never understood why. Because they're learning, Santos realized. Each civilization they consume adds to their knowledge base. They're not just harvesting resources. They are harvesting information, technology, cultural adaptations. The strike team reached the base of the structure and began placing the radiation devices at key structural points identified in their briefing. As Santos secured her final device, a strange sensation washed over her, a presence in her mind, alien yet undeniably conscious. The swarm was aware of them, not through conventional detection methods, but through some form of psychic awareness that defied hegemony understanding of swarm capabilities. They're scanning us psychically, Santos warned the team. Prepare for immediate resistance. As if in response to her words, the organic walls around them began to shift and pulse. From recessed chambers, combat drones emerged, not the mindless workers they had encountered earlier, but specialized defense variants with enhanced sensory organs and weaponized appendages. Defensive positions, Santos ordered. Chen, begin the countdown sequence. We hold this position until the devices are active. As the team formed a defensive perimeter, the strange psychic pressure in Santos' mind intensified. The swarm wasn't just detecting their presence, it was trying to understand them, to comprehend the unpredictable threat these diverse species working in concert represented. And deep within that alien consciousness, Santos sensed something unexpected: fear. The triumphal return of the Vega strike team should have been a moment of unalloyed celebration. Instead, Santos found herself haunted by the psychic connection she had experienced with the swarm consciousness. As the team was processed through medical evaluation and debriefing protocols, she requested a private meeting with Admiral Ziv Korel. There's something we need to discuss about the swarm, she explained in the Admiral's private chambers, away from the monitoring systems that recorded official debriefings. Something I glimpsed in their collective mind. The Admiral's scales shifted to a pattern indicating deep concern. The hegemony has encountered no evidence of swarm telepathic capabilities in 3 centuries of war. Because you weren't looking for it, Santos replied. Your psychic sciences focus on structured telepathic exchanges, ordered thoughts transmitted according to established protocols. The swarm's consciousness isn't structured that way. It's impressionistic, emotional rather than logical. She struggled to articulate what she had experienced. When our minds connected, I received fragments, impressions of their evolutionary history, their encounters with other galactic civilizations. Admiral, the swarm has consumed thousands of species across multiple galaxies, but they recognize something familiar in humanity. Familiar how? The Admiral asked, his scales now displaying a pattern Santos had never seen before. They've encountered only one other species that posed a similar threat, a species with our capacity for adaptive thinking and unpredictable strategy. She paused, watching the Admiral carefully. The swarm showed me images of that species, Admiral. They looked remarkably like the statues of the progenitors in the Hegemony Council chambers. The silence that followed felt oppressive. Finally, the Admiral's scales settled into a formal pattern. We should investigate this further. There are restricted archives that might contain relevant information. The Hegemony's central databanks occupy a secure facility beneath their headquarters on Axiom Prime. As a senior fleet commander, Ziv Kordal had access levels that allowed them to bypass most security protocols. Even so, certain sections remained restricted, requiring additional authorization codes. The historical records of the progenitor era are considered sacred, the Admiral explained as they navigated the labyrinthine data structure. Few outside the Council historians have ever accessed the complete archives. Santos noted that the organization of information followed the same rigid patterns as hegemony military doctrine, perfectly logical but utterly predictable. Have you ever wondered why the hegemony systems are designed with such emphasis on order and predictability? She asked. The Admiral paused, his access routines momentarily interrupted. It is the way of the progenitors, he replied automatically, then stopped, as if hearing his own words with new awareness. But to answer your question directly, no, I have never questioned it. They discovered the first anomaly in the chronological records of early hegemony expansion. The official history described the progenitors' rise to dominance as a peaceful process of cultural and technological sharing. But buried within technical appendices were references to military campaigns against species classified as chaotic and destabilizing influences. These species were quarantined, Santos noted, highlighting relevant passages, just like Earth. Deeper in the archives, they found references to Protocol 7319, the same protocol used to isolate Earth. Its original implementation predated Earth's discovery by thousands of years. The protocol was first established to contain species exhibiting dangerous levels of tactical unpredictability and evolutionary adaptability. The Admiral read, his translator unable to mask his growing disquiet. Their investigation led them to a sealed section of the archives accessible only through the Admiral's genetic verification. The system recognized his DNA pattern, but displayed an unexpected message. Progenitor lineage confirmed. Full access granted. Progenitor lineage. Santos questioned. The Admiral's scales displayed genuine shock. I am Velixeri from the outer colonies. My ancestors were settlers. Not. The sealed archives opened, revealing the truth hidden for millennia. The progenitors hadn't ascended beyond physical form as hegemony doctrine taught. They had deliberately removed themselves after engineering a galactic society designed to maintain perfect order and predictability. Santos found the final log entry, dated thousands of years earlier. We have created the perfect society, one of order, predictability, and eternal stability. To ensure it remains unchallenged, we have established Protocol 7319 for any species exhibiting dangerous levels of innovation or unpredictability. The log continued. Our genetic legacy will remain distributed throughout key hegemony bloodlines to maintain continuity of purpose. When the great entropy eventually threatens our perfect order, those carrying our genetic markers will guide the necessary adjustments while preserving the fundamental stability we have established. The Admiral stared at the screen, scales now a chaotic pattern indicating profound distress. They engineered us, he whispered. All of us. Every hegemony species, modified to value order above all else. To reject chaos even when chaos is necessary for survival. Santos studied the genetic modification details with growing horror. This wasn't about protecting the galaxy from dangerous species. Earth wasn't quarantined because we were a threat to others. No, the Admiral agreed, his voice hollow. Humanity was quarantined because you were a threat to the perfect, unchanging order the progenitors established. An order deliberately designed to be incapable of defeating threats like the swarm. Before Santos could respond, emergency alarms blared throughout the facility. The Admiral accessed the command channel, his scales instantly shifting to battle readiness despite his internal turmoil. "Report," he ordered. The response came from his first officer, voice tight with controlled panic. "Admiral, multiple swarm hive clusters have broken through our defensive lines. They're on a direct course for Axiom Prime. The hegemony homeworld is under attack for the first time in the war's history." The battle above Axiom Prime unfolded in chaotic brilliance against the backdrop of the galaxy's core. Swarm vessels, more numerous than in any previous engagement, pressed forward with unprecedented coordination. They had adapted to many human tactics, developing specialized defenses against railguns and conventional explosives. But they could not adapt to the fundamental unpredictability that now characterized the Allied fleet's movements. From the command deck of the flagship Guardian, Santos and Admirals Ziv Coral directed the defense of the hegemony homeworld. The knowledge they had uncovered in the archives hung between them, a shared burden that would forever change galactic civilization if they survived to reveal it. "The progenitors created us to be predictable," the Admiral said quietly as they watched the tactical display. "They feared the chaos of natural evolution because it could not be controlled. And in doing so, they'd made you vulnerable to an enemy that thrives on predictability," Santos replied. "But we can change that, starting today." The combined fleet had adopted a hybrid command structure unlike anything in hegemony history. Each species now fought according to their natural instincts and evolutionary adaptations rather than conforming to the rigid hegemony doctrine. Avian species executed complex three-dimensional maneuvers that the swarm struggled to track. Aquatic species created fluid, ever-changing formations based on water current dynamics from their homeworlds. Santos activated the fleet-wide communication channel. The quantum disruption devices developed after the Vega mission had proven effective at local scales, but the scale of this battle required something more comprehensive. It was time for Operation Wildfire's final phase. "All vessels, this is Commander Santos. The swarm has adapted to our weapons, but not to our spirit. They rely on understanding patterns, but they cannot understand what drives us. The will to protect our homes, our history, our future. Today, we show them something they've never encountered: unified diversity." Throughout the fleet, commanders acknowledged the transmission. A hegemony officer would have delivered precise technical instructions. Santos instead offered something human commanders had given their forces for millennia: purpose. Each species in this fleet evolved on different worlds, under different stars. We look different, think differently, fight differently. The hegemony taught you to suppress these differences. Humanity is asking you to embrace them. Fight as yourselves, not as copies of an ideal that never existed. Across the battle space, something remarkable occurred. Ships from 100 worlds began breaking from traditional formations, fighting according to their species' unique instincts and cultural approaches. In sector after sector, the swarm's adaptive responses faltered against tactics they couldn't categorize or predict. Admiral Ziv Coral, watching the tactical display with scales showing a complex mixture of emotions, activated his command channel. "All hegemony vessels, this is Admiral Ziv Coral. I am implementing emergency protocol override. Effective immediately, all captains are authorized to disregard standard doctrine and adapt tactics based on their species' natural combat instincts." The directive contradicted thousands of years of hegemony military tradition. For a moment, silence filled the channel. Then acknowledgments began flowing in, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. Santos nodded to the Admiral, then turned to Major Takashi. "Initiate Operation Wildfire's final phase." 12 human vessels, modified with hegemony technology, but piloted with human unpredictability, accelerated directly toward the largest swarm command ships. The maneuver appeared suicidal, exactly as intended. The swarm, having witnessed similar human tactics before, adjusted their defenses to counter the expected kinetic weapons. Instead, the human vessels executed a precisely coordinated series of micro-jumps, appearing inside the swarm's defensive perimeter. Before the swarm could respond, the vessels detonated specialized disruption devices, not as weapons, but as delivery mechanisms for a quantum signal. Throughout occupied space, on worlds consumed by the swarm, resistance cells activated identical devices simultaneously. The carefully coordinated quantum disruption created a cascading failure across the swarm's entire communication network. For the first time in recorded history, the swarm collective consciousness fragmented. Individual hive clusters, suddenly cut off from the central intelligence, fell into disarray. Some continued attacking according to their last instructions. Others withdrew to defensive positions. Many simply went dormant, awaiting reconnection to the hive mind. In the command center, the tactical display showed the swarm forces losing cohesion. The admiral's scales displayed a pattern Santos had never seen before, one that the translator identified as profound wonder. 3 centuries of war, he said quietly, and the solution was not a superior weapon or tactic, but embracing the very diversity the progenitors feared. Santos watched as Allied vessels pressed the advantage, targeting confused swarm clusters with coordinated but wildly varied attack patterns. The progenitors were wrong. Perfect order isn't strength, it's stagnation. Life thrives through change, adaptation, diversity of approach. For the first time in the long war, the swarm began a full retreat from hegemony space. Not a tactical withdrawal to regroup, but a genuine retreat, a species-wide recognition that they had encountered something they could not consume or understand. As the battle turned decisively in their favor, Santos turned to the admiral. When this is over, the truth about the progenitors must be revealed. The quarantine of Earth and other unpredictable species must end. The admiral's scales shifted to a formal pattern of commitment. The hegemony as we know it cannot continue. What will replace it, I cannot predict. Santos smiled at the irony. That's the point, Admiral. The future should be unpredictable.